Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us and kicking this off. I was having a think on my way here about some of the similar events I've covered in the past, and I think it's been almost impossible to ever cover one of these summits or anything to do with energy without mentioning transition. It's been the one word that has come up again and again. But we are now in a radical new universe. Security is now impossible not to discuss when we're thinking about energy. Wars have disrupted critical supply chains. Tensions in the Middle East are threatening to cut off crucial shipping lanes. AI has turbocharged demand for electricity in a completely different way. And all of those challenges are really particularly acute in Asia. And that is framing very big and different questions for this part of the world, not least whether energy security policy is now tantamount to industrial policy, whether geopolitics is going to change the nature of open global energy markets, and what happens next with AI, particularly in Asia and this part of the world. So it's a pleasure to be joined by four esteemed experts covering markets, policy making, geopolitics, finance. And I think if we just want to begin and kind of think about this event as setting the scene for conversations that happen, maybe, Vandana, I want to ask you just to lay out the new era of energy security. What does that mean to you? What does it mean if disruption becomes the norm? And where does that leave policymakers?
Thank you, Rebecca, and very good evening, everyone. I think that's a good place to start. When we think about energy supply security, I like to start by putting it in context. So when we look at primary energy globally, 80% of global primary energy is fossil fuels. I think that's a reality we need to acknowledge in order to start talking about our security today and tomorrow, and then look at what it will look like once we transition away from the fossil fuels. So 80% of primary energy is oil, natural gas, and coal. That's the global average. If you look at Asia, where we're sitting, that ratio rises to 88 to 90%. So again, very, very important to keep in mind. The dependence, the reliance on fossil fuels. The other big imperative to keep in mind, again, sitting here in Asia, is that Asia uses about 40 million barrels per day of oil, give or take. That's about 38% of the global total. It produces just about 7 to 8 million barrels per day. So 80% of oil use in Asia has to be imported. This is also the only region in the world, well, there's Africa and South America where the growth rate is high as well, but the only region which has the highest growth rate when it comes to energy, all forms of energy. So what that means is you are already 80% dependent. 2/3 of the LNG that was traded last year came into Asia as well. So you have massive import dependencies. The import dependencies are only going to grow. When was the last time any of you heard of a major oil field or a gas field being found in this region? So you have to keep all of this in mind, the perspective that there's 88 to 90% dependency on fossil fuels. There is a growing dependency on imports. And with that comes the dependency or the vulnerability to geopolitics. You mentioned that. I think we are in a geopolitical flux. I think this is going to remain with us for decades, definitely years. Definitely, when I look at the rest of my lifetime, I think we can be assured that there's going to be geopolitical wars. There's going to be energy weaponization. This is just a reality we have to keep in mind. So I'll leave it at that.
I want to pick up on that point about the sort of acute vulnerability of Asia and where we're sitting in the context of some of those crises, and thinking particularly, Keong, about Singapore and where Singapore, I mean, practically speaking, imports virtually all of its energy, and it has dealt with this problem for many decades. What do you think governments, take us first with the Singaporean government, has learned from the recent crises? And then maybe you can add a little bit of context on how that compares to other policy reactions you're seeing elsewhere.
Yeah. Well, maybe let me briefly give a context of Singapore energy system. Right? I think Vandana talked about how import dependent is Asia, right, on fossil fuels and imported fuel. And that is the case in Singapore too. So today, most of the electricity in Singapore is generated from natural gas, 95% of it. And half of the gas we import from Malaysia, Indonesia through pipelines. And the other half we actually import from in form of LNG from different places of the world. So when the conflict in the Middle East happened, it did in fact affect some of the supplies of LNG to Singapore to the tune of about 1 cargo a month. And that does mean that the gas users in Singapore, Gencos, industrial users, do have to engage their fuel suppliers to look for alternative sources, right? And we have been able to bring them in, so there's no fuel shortage in Singapore. There's no blackouts in Singapore due to the crisis. But it does mean that prices have gone up, right? So one of the impact which we announced just end of last month is that this, what we call the regulated tariff, which most of the households in Singapore are on, will see a pretty big 17–80% increase in prices compared to the previous quarter. So it has affected supplies to Singapore, costs have gone up. But how do we approach energy security even in the wake of potential disruptions? And many of the lessons that we had actually taken away from the previous energy crisis, and that was when just post-COVID, there was a sharp rise in energy demand, but supply chain haven't quite caught up. And then the Russian-Ukraine war happened, and again, big shocks to the energy markets and big increase in natural gas prices. So we have instituted quite a number of reforms to how we look at energy in Singapore. So one of it is that we decided that actually it's quite important to have more reserves. So we have since built up our own LNG reserves, and that will add into our diesel reserve that is important to power our power generation. We have tightened some of the requirements in our energy markets to raise the level of security needed for electricity retailers, and that will ensure that they're sufficiently hedged and they're sufficiently supplied to meet the needs of their customers. And more recently, we also decided to set up a new company that's owned by the government called Singapore Gas Co. And this company, one of the key roles is that it will centralize the procurement of natural gas for the power sector. And that we have learned that it's necessary in order to make sure that when we procure gas, we procure enough of it. We make sure it's diversified across geographies, across suppliers, even across price indices. And that's one of the key kind of changes to how we have looked at the energy market. So in other words, resulting from the volatilities, I think there has been a stronger hand in the government to try to calm markets down, to ensure supplies, ensure diversification.
I just want to pick up briefly on that point. Where do you see a more fundamental rewiring of the balance between the market and government intervention? And is that shift permanent?
Yeah. Well, I would say it's always a delicate balance, and it's never one or the either, right? So, yes, in some cases, we do see that we do need to take a stronger hand to reduce the kind of extreme volatilities that you may otherwise see, to prevent instances of insufficient fuel supplies. But Singapore still strongly believes in markets. We still strongly believe that we need to go out there and encourage investments, which there's still a major role for industries to play. So even in the most recent Middle East conflict where oil prices shot up, huge increase in the prices of petroleum products, some countries in this part of the world may have seen a shortage of supply and queues of forming up at petrol gas stations. But in Singapore's case, we have continued to let markets operate. We have continued to let the refineries operate, bring in crude oil from other sources and continue to refine them and exports them to their customers from around the region. So we believe that remains a very strong role for markets that is necessary in order to let the price signals encourage more investments into the energy sector, and that is necessary in order to increase the supply of energy.
I mean, what you're talking about is one key element, I think, of that sort of energy trilemma, the affordability question. And we see it all the time in Singapore. It's hard to take a cab these days without the driver complaining about the cost of fuel, right? Like, we all must have that conversation several times a week these days. The other elements being security, which of course we're also talking about, and decarbonisation. Now, it has become incredibly difficult for governments around the world to prioritise all of those three. And Len, I'm kind of thinking from your position, everyone, I think, agrees that governments across Asia, institutions, banks and so on, need to be more coordinated in their response. Everyone wants more regional coordination. What is actually stopping that from happening in your view? Is it politics? Is it difficulty around infrastructure? Is it not being able to kind of coordinate around the right type of tech? And where do you see the breakthroughs happening?
Thanks, Rebecca. So I think what Keong mentioned in terms of Singapore striking that balance between markets and some form of government support, it kind of defines how Singapore has reacted to this particular crisis. But if you just step back and look at what's happened in the Middle East, close to about 80% of the oil and 90% of the gas from that region essentially meets demand in Asia. And so countries in the region have essentially had to pivot to other sources or look at other ways to kind of meet this crisis. While, again, if you're looking at ASEAN, some of what the ASEAN leadership is looking at is in terms of can there be better coordination on fuel security and fuel supplies. And we're seeing examples. For example, Laos and Vietnam, they've had this kind of bilateral agreement where Vietnam is able to kind of shift some of their oil to Laos and also help them access markets. So we are seeing pockets of that happening in the region. But I think the big challenge has been how do you get some of the big ticket items on the agenda? For example, there's been a lot of discussion on the ASEAN power grid over the last couple of decades. And particularly over the last year or two, we've seen a lot of movement. Both ADB and some of our other partners are looking at various financing avenues, including supporting projects that can then move to financial closure. I think the technology exists. I think what is really holding things back is the ability to transform some of that political kind of objectives into actual investments on the ground, and translating political will into some form of collaboration between the private sector and the public sector to kind of get these projects off the ground. Some of these projects, of course, Singapore is looking at the private sector driving some of these imports, but in a lot of other countries in the region, Laos or Thailand or Malaysia or even Indonesia, there would be a strong role for public sector entities to kind of also play a role and kind of put in place the building blocks for some of these investments. And so that's really where we're seeing some of these delays happening, and that's part of what we're working with our partners in these countries in terms of trying to address.
And thinking about, I think that investable reality is a perfect moment to bring in Russell. Where do you see, or how do you see capital, the flow of capital changing as a result of the kind of new energy security landscape that we now sit in? And I'm curious too how you see AI fitting into that piece, particularly with the various demands, data centers and so on, that we will see and already seeing play out in much of Southeast Asia, for example.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. Maybe let me start by running through a few tenets that I think that drives a bit of pragmatism to the whole topic. I think first, energy is prosperity. Higher standards of living typically requires higher energy per capita. I think the real question is how much of this energy comes from clean sources and how efficiently we use it. So that dictum doesn't change, and I think we have to take into consideration that. Second, I think to the piece of resiliency or energy security. Interestingly, I think in the previous paradigm of globalization, our global supply energy networks were deemed as a feature of resiliency. Obviously, today this paradigm is no longer true. The assumption is invalid. Now, coming back to how Temasek looks at it, we have a long-term view, we take a holistic approach, and we take a pragmatic approach. I can break into 5 broad pieces in simplified terms. So we look at how we make energy, how we move energy, how we use energy in these 3 stacks. Then there are 2 horizontals that cut across all these 3 stacks. One is innovation in financing. One is innovation in technology. Now, in all these stacks, we have investments that are long-term green and yet pragmatic, right? So we have invested in fusion, we have invested in nuclear fission, we have invested in next generation perovskite solar panels, we have invested in electricity generation technology that are fuel agnostic as and when hydrogen comes cheap enough, or green hydrogen comes cheap enough. So we have that whole stack. Our gencos that I think Keong is very familiar, invest in CCGTs that are hydrogen ready. So that stack, we are deploying capital. Obviously, Temasek is for commercial return investors, so we look at this. Now, moving energy obviously has its own challenges. So we have invested in grid technologies. We have invested in transformers that are solid state and next generation, vastly more efficient, highly suited for AIDCs. On the use of energy, obviously, we have also invested in hard-to-abate sectors, cement, steel. We've invested in very novel material and chip architecture that is vastly more energy efficient to do the AI tokens we're all increasingly familiar with. We have invested in new AI model architectures yet to be proven that are vastly more energy efficient. So that whole stack. Now, coming to the horizontals that affect all these 3. I think recently, if you look at what Temasek has participated, what Singapore Central Monetary Authority BAS has spearheaded, I think they call it FASP. There are 3 buckets there. One revolves around how do you finance marginally bankable infrastructure solutions. Second, how do you help transition coal or fossil fuels to cleaner sources. Third, how do you, again, in a similar vein, help hard-to-abate industrial sectors do the transition? And so that's one whole track. Now, coming to AI, I view it as a horizontal. I know in most of these forums, like you rightly said, it is causing a substantial surge in electricity demand because of the AIDC centers. Now, the other piece of the equation is, I think AI fundamentally will accelerate innovation. It is a platform that can allow us to discover new materials that can be used in fusion walls, will be used in operating grids in the future that make it vastly more efficient. Google has pioneered some of this, and so on and so forth. So that piece, I think, is critical. It is going to bring innovation and discovery from the future to the present. So that piece is also an area we have been actively investing as a firm to enable this accelerated discovery innovation. I think we're going to enter a period where, especially I think by end of this decade or next decade, where you see innovation accelerate very rapidly. Notwithstanding, I think we will enter a more chaotic world for all the reasons we have familiar. There will be maximum innovation, extremely chaotic 2030s. So that's my view.
I just want to pick up on one of those points. What technology, of all those ones that you have listed and all of that exposure, what has surprised you most about the ability to scale?
Okay. The current mainstream AI architecture, loosely called transformer architecture, as amazing as it is, as rapid as the progress is fundamentally an inefficient AI architecture that is very energy inefficient. the more advanced it is, the longer it needs to think, the automatic workloads that come with agentic workflows. There's one core architecture there called the self-attention mechanism that scales quadratically in compute and memory architectures. We are actively looking at the technologies that substitute this component. In fact, now that you mention it, source of innovations can be very, very orthogonal. So there's a famous computational scientist that works on molecular dynamics that try and simulate how molecules interact. Today, you can't simulate beyond a few nanoseconds because it's computationally too intensive. He's just published a paper that articulates you can conceivably substitute this whole mechanism with a different architecture that's a lot more efficient, that will use a different kind of chipset that is fundamentally not digital but analog. Now, if all this breaks through, you may see the energy equation for generating AI tokens change quite drastically. Now, the other thing that I've came across as quite a remarkable piece of information that I think I should share with all of you. 10 years ago, the Department of Energy embarked on a study around how energy-intensive manufacturing chemicals are in the US. So in US, they manufacture about 70,000 types of chemicals every year at a certain volume. So they just picked the 65 most popular chemicals they manufacture by volume. If you do the theoretical calculation of these reactions, it's exothermic. By that, it means it releases energy to the tune to whatever US is manufacturing 10 years ago, 200 terawatt hours. I was doing the math. It's 4 times what Singapore consumes a year, release of energy. In practice, it's consuming close to 900 terawatt hours to manufacture those. 15 times Singapore energy's consumption last year. So there's a lot of innovation that can happen that can change the way we use energy and manufacture stuff. Now, this will take time, but I think AI will accelerate all this in the coming years.
To bring it back down to kind of more local reality, I was seeing that there is a local village in the UK that is using a data center the size of a washing machine to heat up the local swimming pool. So, all to say, there are extraordinary solutions all around us. When we think about that, the reality and the cost of that, I think in the Singapore context, Keong, I mean, there is also this reality that in Singapore, as you say, the cost is being passed on to the consumer. Yeah. And there is also a desire still to keep Singapore a competitive place to think about data centers and so on. And of course, the semiconductor industry that we have here. How do you approach that from a policy-making point of view? How are you keeping costs down for the consumer? Touched a little bit on that. And also keeping Singapore competitive and attracting businesses. What does that mean in real terms?
Yeah. Well, from the Singapore energy market point of view, what we will try to do is to harness the market forces to try to encourage competition between the gencos, right? Some of our gencos are actually companies that's owned by Temasek. But, we have liberalized the market 25 years ago. We have attracted foreign investments in. One of the big change is the fuel switch. 25, 20, 30 years ago, a big part of Singapore's power generation is still from fuel oil. So with the market liberalization, we encourage investments into natural gas. We brought in gas from Malaysia, Indonesia, and now with LNG. And that itself drove a big part of the decline in energy costs. Improvements in energy efficiency and also improvements in the grid emission factor. And we also have a competitive retail market and retailers, gentailers compete aggressively for contracts of the big energy consumers. So I think that's going to be a big part of it. A key to keeping costs low is also good regulations. And on this part, EMA is very careful to look at how we regulate, especially the monopolies of the energy markets, the grid provider, the RNG terminal operator, to make sure that we keep within a certain amount of returns that is reasonable. We make sure we expand the grid to be able to have provide reliable energy. We want to have sufficient capacity to meet a rapid increase in energy demand from consumers. But so how do we make sure that we project forward energy demand and only invest in the grid when necessary to keep overall grid charges low? But that said, one of the things that I do have to admit is that in this part of the world, in Southeast Asia, even in East Asia, Singapore's energy costs are still among the highest. Energy costs in Singapore, electricity costs is probably 2 to 3 times that of many ASEAN countries. So what does that mean? That means that when companies choose to invest in Singapore, especially energy-intensive companies, they do have to look at, okay, how do I look at my regional portfolio? What do I put in Singapore where costs are higher, where land is more scarce, where labor is more expensive, and what do I put in other parts of ASEAN or Asia? And I think that is quite an important part of how companies will have to look at their portfolio. In Singapore's case, our costs are higher, energy costs are higher, but our attractiveness to investments depend on the broader ecosystem as well. Reliability, we have by far the most reliable energy grids in this part of the world. Our speed of how we work with other government economic agencies to allow new investments to come in quickly to provide them with the utilities they need. And that is also a source of attractiveness.
Thinking about building out that energy resilience piece in Asia particularly, Len, before we kind of think about, kind of close up and think about some of these more forward-looking projections, ASEAN is coming to Singapore next year. Where do you see the biggest missed opportunity for regional cooperation? Do you see or foresee a future where that gap might be closed?
I think that's the endeavor of people here in this room, including on this panel, and that's going to be something that's going to keep us all busy over the next few months. Clearly, I mean, this whole concept of the ASEAN power grid has been in the offing for 30 plus years, but progress has been slow. I think while there is a lot of focus on the point-to-point connections between countries, there's also a lot of work that needs to happen in domestic grids to enable the flow of electrons to happen. And so we are at present actively engaged in places like Indonesia and Laos, in Thailand, trying to understand how best could ADB and other partners through their resources support some of these programs in terms of moving forward and putting these building blocks in place. So that's clearly a focus and an area which I hope is not missed, and we can see some action in the next year or so. Yeah.
And Vandana, thinking even further ahead and looking to say 2030, what do you think is going to matter most and be the sort of defining reality for energy security in Asia? And I want to throw in there also, what do you think that governments are misunderstanding about that reality?
So going back to geopolitical flux and energy weaponization sort of going hand in hand, there is a realization, I do feel, in this part of the world amongst governments that is the new reality. That said, how do we build resilience? And economic resilience depends on energy supply security. So in a lot of ways, I do see the governments going back to the drawing board. Whereas a few years ago, the emphasis had swung too much to how do we decarbonize? How do we just plow in all the funds we can find into renewables and solar, wind, and so on? It's the dialogue has come back a little bit towards the center, and I heard Russell use the word pragmatism a few times. So to your question about what governments are maybe missing, I don't think much. The real challenge for the governments today is that you have to scramble, you have to use a lot of your resources to secure your energy supply today and tomorrow. And that leaves very little bandwidth to think about the day after. But I think they are finding their way out of this. I think all of the above approach is going to be one, and I already see governments in this part of the world acknowledging and accepting that fossil fuels will have to stay. More than 50% of Asia's power generation comes from coal. You can't just jettison coal, overnight. So there's that pragmatism, there's an acknowledgement. The good thing that I have seen also on the international stage, also with all the various COPs that have happened in recent years, is that the global south, some people don't like that term, but Asia has found its voice, and they've said, do not lecture to us, like US and Europe, do not lecture to us that, that we need to now just move away from fossil fuels. We cannot afford to do that. We still need to make sure that supply is available to everybody, accessibility is there, affordability is there. So I would say probably it's a huge challenge, but I do see governments are sort of getting their arms around it. I think the one final point I'd like to make is, and then it's already been said around the SPARE panel as well, I think in this part of the world, and in ASEAN, Southeast Asia, I think more collaboration and cooperation is absolutely imperative. And I hope this challenge sort of catalyzes that. We've been talking about the ASEAN, Pan-ASEAN grid for a long time. I hope governments now really get together and do that. Something else they could do is also come together to put up a strategic petroleum reserve, for instance. And not every country needs to have its own. Of course, you'll have to get over some sort of geopolitics or governance issues and so on. But this is the time for governments to come together, because I think there's going to be more resilience available in collaborating.
I want to ask you about one of the points that Russell made, that in a world of globalization, actually that has proved to be a fundamental part of our undoing, one could argue, right? And so in that world, and I want to give you the final word here, in that world of perhaps inevitable fragmentation, where global open trade is perhaps no longer sought after in some areas, where do you see Asian nations fitting into that piece? And also think about rewiring of trade between, for example, so-called middle countries, which is another term that people don't like, but is relatively useful in this context. Paint us that picture. What do you think that looks like in real terms for Asian nations who are struggling with that dilemma that Russell has painted?
So, yes, fragmentation is a reality. We are moving from a bipolar to a unipolar world to now people are talking about a multipolar world. What is that multipolar world going to look like? Nobody knows. When is it going to arrive? We don't know. Is it China going to be another pole of another center of power? Is Russia going to be one? Is India going to be one? And how are they going to interact and play together? We don't know. The one thing that does give me comfort and confidence is that as far as commodities and the flow of commodities globally is concerned, I don't think that can get fragmented. Energy weaponization, unfortunately, has become unavoidable, but I think as long as a producer, a country has commodities, excess commodities to sell, they will want to sell it, they will export it, and as long as countries need and they have the money to, like Singapore, they will look at the way Singapore imported LNG and made sure that there was no shortages. So global commodity trade flows will not be affected by will not get fragmented as such, but we will have to manage around on the diplomacy level in terms of how you create your energy security with buffers, diversification, and so on. And I think Asian countries will find their way around that. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. It's going to be a difficult and challenging time, but they'll find their way around it. I think global commodities will continue to flow.
Well, that's a promising end. But I think the mention of "we don't know" 3 times is probably also a very good reason that we're all sitting here, and I think also will be a source of lots of fruitful and fascinating conversations over the next few days. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us, asking all the right questions, and plenty of answers.